There is a price on everything worth having. Everything. And most people spend their entire lives standing at the counter, looking at what they want, reading the price tag, and quietly walking away. I want to talk to you today about something that nobody warns you about. Something that every great man and woman who ever lived discovered, usually the hard way, usually alone, usually in the middle of the night. And it is simply this. Becoming who you were meant to be is going to cost you something. It is going to hurt, and you must pay it anyway. Now, I know what you might be thinking. You've heard about goals. You've heard about attitude, about persistence, about believing in yourself, and all of that is true and worth your time. But what they don't always tell you, what gets left out of the comfortable version of the story, is that real growth, the kind that changes you at the level of your character, your identity, the very shape of who you are. That kind of growth arrives wrapped in difficulty. It comes to you wearing the face of discomfort, of loss, of the long and exhausting seasons when nothing seems to be working. Out of every 100 people who set out to genuinely change their lives, not just their circumstances, but themselves, perhaps 5 or 6 will see it through. Not because they were smarter, not because they were luckier, but because they were willing to keep paying the price after the enthusiasm wore off, after the novelty faded, after everyone around them had stopped asking how it was going. I remember sitting with a stack of biographies once, men and women who had built something remarkable with their lives. And I noticed something. Every single one of them had a chapter they didn't particularly enjoy living through. A chapter of loss, of uncertainty, of painful transformation. Lincoln, Edison, Helen Keller. They didn't skip that chapter. They couldn't. Because that chapter was doing something to them. It was not interrupting their story. It was writing their story. Here is the strange truth that I want you to sit with for a moment. The pain of becoming is not the enemy of your success. It is the process of your success. We have been taught to avoid discomfort, to optimize for ease, to find the path of least resistance. And for small things, perhaps that's reasonable. But for the things that matter, for the life you were designed to live, that approach will quietly, patiently, and completely destroy you. Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and one of the wisest men who ever put a thought to paper, wrote, "A man's life is what his thoughts make of it." And I've turned that sentence over in my mind for a long time, because I think he was pointing at something deeper than positive thinking. He was pointing at the fact that the man who thinks he can avoid the price of greatness is already paying a different price, the price of smallness, the price of a life lived inside the borders of what is safe and familiar and comfortable and entirely too small for him. Think about a ship leaving harbor, a magnificent ship built for the open ocean, for distance, for weather, for the kind of journey that tests everything it was made of. Now imagine that ship never leaving the harbor, tied to the dock, safe from storms, safe from the unknown, but slowly, quietly rusting. The harbor was never its destiny. The harbor was just where it was kept while it figured out where it was going. And some ships, I'm sorry to say, never leave. That is what happens to a man or a woman who refuses to pay the price of becoming. They remain in harbor, maintained, comfortable, and rusting in a way that doesn't make noise, doesn't draw attention, but is happening nonetheless, day by day, year by year. Now, let me tell you something about the price, because I think there is a misunderstanding here that holds people back. When I say growth will cost you, I don't necessarily mean money, though sometimes it does. I mean something more personal than that. Growth costs you the version of yourself you've grown comfortable being. It costs you the image you've built of who you are. It costs you the opinions of people who preferred the old you, because the old you never made them feel like they should be changing too. That last one is worth pausing on. Think about it for a moment. When you begin to grow, when you begin to reach for something more than what you've settled for, you will discover something unsettling. Some of the people around you will not celebrate it. They will question it. They will call it impractical or selfish or a phase, not because they are bad people, but because your movement is a mirror, and not everyone is ready to look in it. Ralph Waldo Emerson understood this. He wrote that to be great is to be misunderstood. And he wasn't romanticizing the loneliness of it. He was simply reporting a fact that he had lived himself. The price of becoming who you are meant to be will sometimes include the temporary discomfort of being misread, misunderstood, and misjudged by people whose good opinion you valued. You pay that price too. And then you keep going. Now, here's where I want to introduce what I think is the most useful image for all of this. Think about a farmer, a good farmer, the kind who knows his land and takes his work seriously. He doesn't plant in the spring and then stand back and say, well, let's see if anything happens. He works. He tends. He watches the weather. He gets up early. He stays out late. He does not control when the rain comes. He does not control the temperature of the soil. What he controls is his faithfulness to the process. He plants with the confidence that if he does his part, the ground will do its part. But here is the thing that I find most remarkable about that farmer. Between the planting and the harvest, there is a period, sometimes a long period, when you cannot see anything happening. The field looks bare. It looks like nothing is working. To the man driving by on the road, that field might look like a failure. It looks like dead ground. But under the surface, something extraordinary is taking place. The seed is breaking open, and from that breaking, life is beginning. That is exactly what the seasons of growth feel like when you are living inside them. They look from the outside like nothing. They feel from the inside like too much. Like the breaking is all there is, but the breaking is the beginning. The uncomfortable season is not a detour from your becoming. It is the mechanism of it. William James, perhaps the greatest psychologist this country has ever produced, said something that I have carried with me for a long time. The greatest discovery of my generation is that human beings can alter their lives by altering their attitudes. Now, when I first read that, I thought he was simply talking about optimism, about looking on the bright side. But the longer I live with that sentence, the more I believe he was saying something bolder. He was saying that you are not locked in, that the person you are right now is not the final version, that the distance between who you are and who you are capable of being is a distance that can be traveled, but only if you are willing to move. And movement costs something. It always does. George Bernard Shaw wrote that people are always blaming their circumstances for what they are. He said he didn't believe in circumstances. He said the people who got on in this world were the people who got up and looked for the circumstances they wanted, and if they couldn't find them, they made them. Now, that is not the advice of a comfortable man. That is the advice of a man who understood that circumstances are largely something you negotiate with, not something you simply receive. But to negotiate with your circumstances, you have to be willing to enter the negotiation. And the negotiation is uncomfortable. And most people, when they feel the discomfort begin, assume it means they are going the wrong way. They assume the difficulty is a sign to stop. But I want to suggest to you today that the difficulty is often a sign that you have started, that you have moved off the dock, that the water is under you now, and the harbor is getting smaller behind you. And that is not a reason to turn around. That is a reason to adjust your sails and keep going. I want to speak to something now that I think is at the very heart of this. There is a version of you, a more complete, more realized, more fully developed version of you that exists as a possibility. Not as a guarantee, but as a possibility. And that version of you is waiting on the other side of the price you've been reluctant to pay. It is waiting on the other side of the difficult conversation you've been avoiding, the discipline you've been negotiating with, the dream you've been managing down, to a more reasonable size so that it would feel less frightening to pursue. That more realized version of you knows something that the current version of you is still learning. It knows that the pain of growth, the real, honest, grinding discomfort of becoming, is finite. It has an end. But the pain of never becoming, the long, quiet, invisible pain of a life lived inside the borders of what is safe, that pain doesn't end. It simply spreads. It fills the available space. And it is the loneliest kind of pain there is because it never announces itself. It just becomes the texture of ordinary days. Out of every 100 people, a handful will hear this and do something with it. A handful will finish listening and then sit for a moment in the quiet and ask themselves the question that changes things. What have I been refusing to pay? What price tag have I been reading and walking away from, year after year, telling myself it's not the right time, that I'll be ready later, that the circumstances need to improve first? Something happens to a man around the time he has arranged his life just the way he likes it. The bills are manageable. The routines are set. The mornings feel predictable, and the evenings feel earned. And somewhere in the middle of all that, somewhere in the quiet between what he has and what he once dreamed of having, a strange, cold feeling begins to move through him. Not loud, not dramatic, just a low, persistent whisper that says, "Is this it? Is this all there is?" Most men push that feeling down. They call it ingratitude. They call it restlessness. They pour another cup of coffee and turn on the television and remind themselves of everything they should be grateful for. And they are right to be grateful. But that feeling doesn't go away. It comes back. It comes back in the shower on a Tuesday morning. It comes back at the dinner table when nobody's talking. It comes back at 2 in the morning when the house is dark and still, and a man is left alone with the unedited version of himself. Now, just hold that thought for a moment. Don't run from it, because what I'm about to tell you changes everything. That feeling, that hollow, unsettling sense that you have somehow traded your becoming for your belonging, that you have made your peace with a life that is decent but not fully yours. That feeling is not your enemy. It is not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is, in fact, the most honest signal your inner life will ever send you. It is the sound of a man who was built for more, recognizing the cage he has quietly, carefully, and very comfortably built around himself. Ralph Waldo Emerson said that most men lead lives of quiet desperation and go to the grave with the song still in them. Now think about that. The song still in them, not because they were incapable of singing it, but because the cage was warm, because the familiar, however small, is always more comfortable than the unknown, however magnificent. Here is what I want you to understand. The comfortable life and the complete life are not the same thing. Comfort is a wonderful servant and a very poor destination. The man who organizes his entire existence around the avoidance of discomfort does not find peace. He finds a smaller and smaller room. And one day he looks up and realizes he cannot remember the last time he surprised himself. That hollow feeling you've been quietly carrying, that is not emptiness. That is potential, knocking on the door from the inside, and the door was never locked. It was only heavy. And the only thing that has ever been required of you is the willingness to push. You were not built for the cage. No matter how comfortable it has become, let me ask you something, and I want you to answer it honestly. Not to me, but to yourself. Have you ever wanted something deeply, genuinely, with everything you had, and then, somewhere between the wanting and the doing, simply stopped? Not because the dream disappeared. Not because you decided it wasn't worth having, but because when you got close enough to see what it was actually going to cost you, something inside you went very quiet, turned around, and walked back to where it was safe. Most people have. Most people do. And most people never quite say that out loud, not even to themselves. There is a particular kind of ache that lives in a person who has looked at the price of their own potential and decided, without ever fully admitting it, that they cannot afford it. It sits behind the eyes. It shows up as cynicism about other people's success. It disguises itself as wisdom, as practicality, as maturity, as knowing how the world really works. But underneath all of that reasonable-sounding language is a man or a woman who saw the ticket, felt the size of it, and handed it back. Now, stay with me here, because what I'm about to say matters more than almost anything else I could tell you. The price is real. I am not going to stand here and tell you that the cost of a meaningful life is small or painless or something you can settle in installments without noticing. It is not. The price of becoming who you were built to be will cost you time, years sometimes. It will cost you comfort, the predictable rhythm of a life that asks nothing difficult of you. It will cost you the approval of people who would rather you stayed where they could understand you. And it will cost you the luxury of waiting until you feel ready. Because that moment, I can tell you from long experience, has a way of never quite arriving. But here is the thing that changes everything. The thing that most people never stop long enough to see. The price of not becoming is higher. It is always higher. It simply bills you differently. It doesn't send one large invoice. It sends 1,000 small ones, a little less aliveness here, a little more resignation there, a dream quietly downgraded to a passing thought, a talent quietly retired without ceremony. William James wrote that the human being is the only creature who can choose to become more than he currently is. Think about that. The only creature. That is not a burden. That is the most extraordinary privilege ever given to a living thing. The ticket was always there. It had your name on it. The only question worth asking now is whether you are willing to reach for it. There comes a point in a man's effort, in his genuine, honest, fully committed effort, when the ground beneath him goes completely silent. He has done everything right. He has made the decision, paid the price, shown up when it was inconvenient, kept going when it was unrewarding, and yet nothing. No sign, no signal, no visible evidence that any of it is working. Just the long, flat, featureless silence of a life that appears, from the outside and sometimes from the inside too, to be standing perfectly still. And in that silence, something begins to whisper. Not loudly, but persistently. It says, maybe you were wrong about yourself. Maybe the people who doubted you were seeing something you couldn't. Maybe the season has gone on too long. And the reasonable thing, the honest thing, is to admit that it simply isn't going to happen. That whisper has ended more promising lives than failure ever has. Not because it is true, but because it arrives at exactly the right moment to sound true. It arrives when a man is tired, when his certainty has worn thin, when the gap between where he is and where he believed he would be by now feels less like a distance and more like a verdict. Now hold on. Just hold on for one moment longer. Because what I want to tell you about that silence, about that long, dark, apparently fruitless season, is something that a good farmer has known since the beginning of time, and something that most of us have forgotten in our hurry to see results. When a farmer plants a seed, he does not dig it up 3 weeks later to see if it is working. He does not stand over the field demanding evidence. He waters it. He tends the soil. He trusts the process he cannot see because he understands something fundamental about the nature of living things. The most important work happens underground, in the dark, in the breaking open of the seed before the first green shoot ever reaches the light. Marcus Aurelius wrote that nothing in nature grows without resistance. The tree that stands in the open field, battered by every wind since its beginning, develops a root system that the sheltered tree never needs and never builds. The resistance was not the obstacle to its strength. The resistance was the source of it. That silent season you have been enduring, that long stretch where nothing appears to be moving, that is not the absence of progress. That is the deepest kind of progress. That is the root system going down before the growth goes up. That is the seed doing the one thing it must do before it can become anything at all. You are not stalled. You are not forgotten. You are not wrong about yourself. You are simply in the season that comes before everything. And it always breaks open. It always does. I want you to think about something that most people spend a lifetime carefully avoiding, not because it is complicated, not because the answer is hard to find, but because the question itself, when you allow it to land fully, when you stop deflecting it with busyness and routine and the comfortable noise of an ordinary day, is perhaps the most unsettling question a human being can sit with. Here it is. Simply and plainly, is the person you are today the person you were capable of becoming, not the person circumstances made you, not the person other people's expectations shaped you into, not the version of you that learned, somewhere along the way, to want less so that disappointment would hurt less, but the real one, the original one, the one that existed as a possibility the day you were born, fully formed in potential, waiting only on your willingness to grow into it. Most people, if they are honest, cannot answer that question quickly. They circle it. They qualify it. They say, well, I've done pretty well, all things considered. And that phrase, all things considered, is one of the saddest phrases in the English language. Because what it usually means is, given how much of myself I traded away, given how many times I chose the smaller option, given how faithfully I talked myself out of the larger life, yes, all things considered, I suppose I've done all right. Now, sit with that for just a moment. Don't move past it. Because here is what I believe with everything I have studied, everything I have observed, and everything I have lived. No man is ever fully at peace while living as a lesser version of himself. It is not possible. You can manage it. You can medicate it with distraction and achievement and the approval of people around you. But underneath all of that, in the quiet place where a man meets himself without an audience, there is always a knowing, a persistent, unsilenceable knowing that there was more, that there is more, that the distance between who he became and who he was capable of being is a distance that still exists and still matters. Emerson wrote that every man has a vocation, a calling so particular, so precisely his own, that no other man on earth can answer it in his place. Think about what that means. Not a role, not a title, a calling. Something that the world needs from you specifically that will go unmet if you continue living as the rough draft of yourself. The final version of you is not gone. It has not expired. It is not reserved for younger men. It is simply waiting with extraordinary patience. For the moment you decide that the rough draft is finished, that moment can be now. It can be today. It has always been able to be today. Here is something that nobody tells you when you finally decide to change. When you make the real decision, not the one you announce at the dinner table, not the one you write in a journal on New Year's morning, but the deep, quiet, bone-level decision that this time you are actually going to become the person you were built to be. Something unexpected happens. The world does not applaud. The path does not clear. The people around you do not suddenly understand. Instead, almost immediately, the resistance arrives. And it arrives from every direction at once, from outside you, from inside you, from the very life you are trying to leave behind, pulling at your sleeve like a child who does not want you to go. And a man stands there in the middle of all that resistance and thinks, perhaps this is a sign. Perhaps this much difficulty means I am going the wrong way. Perhaps the people who stayed where they were knew something I don't. That thought has buried more potential than poverty ever has. More than circumstance. More than bad luck or poor timing or any of the 1,000 external reasons a man can find if he looks hard enough. The resistance felt like a wall. But it was never a wall. Now let me tell you what it actually was. Every great life in recorded history, every man and woman who built something worth building, who became something worth becoming, passed through exactly that corridor of resistance. not around it, not over it. Through it. Napoleon Hill spent 20 years studying the most successful men of his era and reported one finding above all others. The point at which most people quit is almost always the point that sits just one step before the breakthrough. Just one step. The wall they turned back from was not the end of the road. It was the last door. George Bernard Shaw wrote that the people who get on in this world are the people who get up and look for the circumstances they want. And when they cannot find them, they make them. That is not the advice of a man who found the road easy. That is the testimony of a man who found the road hard and walked it anyway and arrived somewhere worth arriving. The resistance is not a punishment. It is a confirmation. It means you have left the harbor. It means the water is real and the journey has begun, and everything you were made for is now finally in motion. You do not need the resistance to stop. You do not need the difficulty to become manageable. You do not need certainty or comfort or the approval of anyone who has not made the journey themselves. You only need to keep moving. The price. All of it, without negotiation, because on the other side of what it costs you is everything you were always meant to be. I'm telling you today, as plainly as I know how to say it, the circumstances are rarely going to arrange themselves in your favor. First, the readiness comes from the doing. The confidence comes from the attempting. The becoming comes from the willingness to enter the discomfort before you feel prepared to handle it. There is a passage I keep coming back to in the writings of Marcus Aurelius. He reminds himself, not his subjects, himself, that he should never be unwilling to do the thing his nature and his design demand of him, that the refusal of one's own nature is its own kind of suffering. And I believe he was right. I believe that when a person consistently refuses to become who they are capable of being, they do not escape pain. They simply trade one kind of pain for another, and they get the worse of the two. So here is what I want to leave with you today. Here is the challenge, and it is a simple one, though it is not an easy one. I want you, in the next 24 hours, to identify one thing, just one, that you have been walking away from because the price looked too high. One area of your life where the better version of you is waiting, and the only thing standing between you and that version is a cost you haven't yet been willing to pay, a habit you need to build, a conversation you need to have, a decision you've been postponing, a direction you've been afraid to move in because you couldn't see where it would end. Write it down, just that one thing. And then ask yourself this question. If I knew that paying this price would guarantee my becoming, if I knew that on the other side of this difficulty was the life I was designed to live, would I pay it? I think you know the answer. The ship was not built for the harbor. You were not built for the life that stays small and comfortable and safe. You were built for something that requires more of you. And the becoming of that something will cost you. It will cost you certainty. It will cost you comfort. It will cost you time and ease, and the approval of people who are still waiting in their own harbors, paid it anyway. The only price you cannot afford is the price of becoming no one.